And welcome to part 3, the final part of this series. In today's version of this tutorial, we will be making these editable, as well as the ability to create new ones. So to get started with that, what we're going to do is we're going to, let's create a screen first of all. So we'll go to our screens, and we're going to make something called game form screen.dart. And this will be a stateless widget, game form screen, and in fact we're going to override this to be a like we've been doing in many other things, a consumer widget. Okay, so here we will return a scaffold because it's a screen, and in the app bar let's just do a simple app bar, and for now we will just give it a title of new game, right? And then in its body we're going to do something else. We are going to create a new component, and it's going to be called game form.dart, and this will be the UI of the form. Now when you're dealing with forms and stuff, it's very easy to get lost and know where to separate the UI from the business logic, and I think with the solution I have here that you'll see, it does a pretty good job at doing that. Really, like, this form itself will only be for the UI, and all the logic will be done elsewhere. So let's make that. This will be a stateless widget, call it game form, and once again, consumer widget. I really should make just a snippet for this, but I haven't yet. Okay, so what we're going to start with is let's have a column. And we'll just make its main axis size .min, and we're going to wrap this whole column in a form. Yay! We will be putting a key in here, but we're not ready for that just yet. Then in the children here, we're going to have some text form fields, and let's just give it some decoration, and we'll just do input decoration, and we'll call it. We'll give it a label of name. Oops, but this should be text and then name. And let's just do that. And I'm going to want 3 of these, right? We're going to be letting people edit, for the purposes of this, the name, the console that the game's part of, and the release year, just to have something a little more interesting since it's a number. And then what I'm going to do is, after all these, we're going to have a row, and this is where we're going to have kind of like the action buttons. So let's just do children, and we'll just start with a text button, and on pressed we won't do it yet, but this is going to say, cancel or something, and we'll have another one that will say save. And we want to make this row look pretty good, so we'll give it a main axis alignment. Main axis alignment, not space around, or space between rather, and that will put them on each side of each other. And let's wrap this whole thing in just a bit of padding. Okay, so now back over here, what the body is going to be is the game form itself. So we'll save both of those files, and I'll open this up. So we need a way to get to the screen, obviously, so let's go to our game list screen, and we're going to create a floating action button. So I can just go floating action button, and we'll have an on pressed event for sure, and its child will just be an icon, and we'll just do icons.add. So this will just add a nice little thing to the bottom right that allows us to do things. And in here we are going to use our navigator.ofcontext.push, and here we're going to want to push a material page route, and in its builder we are just going to go and put what was it called, game form screen. So we're going to push the game form screen. Let's do that. Let's also just add a couple commas to make it look nice, and now if we click this, we'll actually go to that screen, and everything's working. Now something that's cool that you can do is we can actually put another parameter here called full screen dialog and set it to true. It's default by default, or it's false by default, but now what happens, it actually comes from the bottom and it's an X instead. So it's a little more like, on Instagram or whatever when you're creating something. So I think that's a good use for this. Okay, so we have that set up. Now nothing's actually happening. I, can't do anything, but let's make stuff happen. So I guess we could start with the cancel one, because what we can do here is we can actually go navigator dot of context dot pop, and that will just remove this screen from the stack. So we'll see that now. It actually goes away. Yay. Oops, I meant to click this. Goes away. But our save, we're not really ready for that yet, because we need something to manage the state of our form. All right, so this is the way I'm going to be showing this is a way I've done this in so many different apps, and I think it works pretty well. I've tweaked things here and there, but this will be great. You'll love it. Game form provider. And I know forms, there's nothing fun about forms, to be honest, but we need them. We need them for sure. It's hard to make an app without at least one form, even if it's just a login form. So we're going to make something called game form provider, which is going to extend state notifier, which is part of riverpod. And the state we're going to be managing is a game. Okay. Now, there's a few things that we're going to want here. First of all, we haven't seen this yet, but we're actually going to have something called ref. And this is kind of the same ref that we have in our consumer widgets, right? It's a little bit different. This is technically a widget ref, and this is a ref. They both inherit from the same thing, but it's something so that this provider can actually talk to another provider, which is something we're going to have to do in this. So we'll just get that ready. We're also going to want a form key, and I'm just going to import in these things, and that will make sense in a bit, but we'll get that. And then we actually want to, I'm going to put our controllers, our text editing controllers, in this file as well. So we're going to have a name controller. We're also going to have a console controller and a year, I think release year controller. I believe that's what we are calling it. So we have all these being instantiated. Then, when the actual game form provider is instantiated, we're going to require the ref to be passed in as the first parameter, and then we're going to require a game to be passed in, its initial state, because this is not even a nullable game. This has to be a fully existing game. Then, after we run this, we're going to, first of all, what we want to do is sort of like update our controllers. So we want to basically take whatever this game is and set their values to it. But we also want to add listeners to these controllers. So I'll just mark that in as something to do later, so that when anything changes with these, our state is actually being updated, which just makes this a lot easier to work with. Now there's a couple of functions we're going to want. We're going to want a load function. And this will allow us to, for editing an existing game, to pass in a game. And all we have to do is take our state, and we need to update it to that game. And that will, notify everything, and things will rebuild, and it will be great. But we also need to do the same thing, update our controllers so that the form inputs themselves get it. Similarly, we might want to clear, when we're finished editing or canceling or something. So we don't have to pass anything, but we want to make state equal to, how do we make a game that's empty? I'm not sure yet. We'll figure that out. And then again, we want to update the controller. So it's pretty clear this updating controller thing needs to happen a few times. So let's make that a function. Update controllers. And all this needs to do is we just take our name controller.text and we set it to state.name, right? So whatever the state of this provider is, we want to update our name controller to also do that. Similarly, we would use our console controller.text, and it would be equal to state.console, and our year controller, or release year controller.text, is going to be equal to state. Now, this one's integer, so we have to do this a little bit differently. We technically want to go, state.year or .release year, but you'll see we're getting this error. But we want to convert it to a string in this case, because we're just putting in the putting it into the UI, and it's requiring it as a string. So now we have this lovely thing, meaning we can, just call this, and I'll get rid of this, and get rid of this, and get rid of this. And then while we're here, let's just add our listeners. So the listener itself, I'll just kind of show you what one would look like. So we need to do this for each of our controllers, but basically we take the name controller, we're adding a listener, and every time that this controller changes, we're going to take our state and we're going to go equaling it. So we're not modifying the state, we're replacing it with a state.copyWith. And this is just a function that is part of our generated code because we're using freeze. We get that for free out of the box, and it's great. It's a lot better than writing it yourself because that gets really tedious and annoying. Now we also need this for the other ones, so we'll put one in for console controller, which everything's the same except we're watching console controller and we're replacing console with the console controller text. And year is again a little bit different because what we need to do is, let's just grab our release year controller and make this say release year. So because we need this state to go back to an integer, what we're going to do is we're going to try and parse the text, and if all fails, meaning the try parse failed, it became null, like you can see here. If for some reason the user typed in a letter, it'll be null and we'll just fall back to 0. So that just keeps everything, safe. So we have that there. Another thing I would like to do in the update controllers is right here, in the case that the year is 0, because remember this is falling back, I don't really want to show 0. So what we can actually do instead is we can go if state.releaseYear equals 0, we will just make it an empty string. Otherwise, we set it to, if it worked, if there's value there, we set it back to that. Okay, so that's kind of our starting point. Now, I was mentioning this, what are we doing here? State equals whatever. Now, we need a way to sort of have what I would call an empty game. So especially when you're creating a new element, we kind of need, what does a game look like before any data has been added? So we're going to go to our game model, and we're actually going to create a new factory for this. And it's going to be called game.empty. I like to use empty. And here, what we will actually be returning is a new game, and we want to kind of set some things on it. So for instance, as ID, we're just going to make an empty string because it hasn't been saved to the database yet. That's good enough for me. Name, also an empty string, because when you come to the form, we'll get them to fill it out. We can do that. Photo will also just be an empty string. Release year, so let's set that to 0. That way that logic we just made will not actually show 0. And created at, we'll just use datetime.now because that's pretty close to what it will be once we save it. So now we have this game.empty factory, which means over here, when we clear, we would actually go state equals game.empty. And there we get a nice game back that's fully empty and ready to go. And then we update our controllers after that. Okay, next, all we've done is kind of created the class, but we need to actually create the singleton instance of it. So we'll call this game form provider, and it's going to be a state notifier provider of type game form provider, and the state that it's managing is game. Now here, what we're going to do is return game form provider, and there's two things we need to pass in. One is ref, which automatically happened just because of the way we name things. That's again the first parameter here. The second one is an initial game state, and what can we use for that? Well, let's use game.empty. Save that file before I forget. Let's just get a trailing comma there. Okay, now let's actually hook in our provider to the UI. So we're going to make something, I'm just going to call it provider. You can call it form provider if you want. And it's going to be equal to ref.read. So we're not watching here, we're reading, because we don't, for this case, actually care about the data changing and working with it, at least yet. But we're going to pass in that game form provider dot notifier. We want to read the notifier. And what the notifier is, it's actually referencing this class. So meaning we can access things like the load, the clear, the whatever. Whereas if we didn't have notifier in here, it would be accessing the game that's part of it right now. And we want the actual provider class. Because that way we can do things like this. We can go and make our key for our form, the provider.form key, right? That's just this thing we instantiated. And that just means we sort of have this global key that, because it's a singleton, it will only exist once, and we can safely add it to there. Similarly, we can add our controllers to these. So I go controller, and I would do provider.nameController. And let's just paste this a couple times. Now when pasting, just be careful to remember that you must update these to the correct ones. release year controller. All right, great. So let's, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's also create our submit function. And submit will be async because we'll be, ultimately doing a network request and stuff. But we can just do future void on it. And let's just, when we submit, let's just print the state just so we can kind of see what things are like. And we'll go to our game form. And what we want to do here is take that same provider and go .submit. So we'll call that. And let's just see if stuff is kind of working the way we hope. So I'm going to make a new thing and I'm going to click save. And we get an instance of a game, ID 0, name is whatever. But let's type in something real here, semi-real, and you'll see actually the name is correct. And console, whatever, we got the console now. So stuff seems to be working in that way. Something that's bothering me is I think we should, in our game form screen, just put a bit of padding around this because it's kind of crushed against the edge. Much better. Okay, so we have that. However, let's talk about validation real quick, because if someone leaves some of these things empty, we might want to throw an error. So the way I like to handle this too is keep that logic out of the UI, and we can do that in our provider as well. So I'm going to just put it right here, and what we're going to do is, so let's just take a look at how this works. So for name controller, I can pass in a validator, right? If you've done anything with forms, you've probably seen this. And this is expecting a function that is going to return a nullable string, and it's going to be passing in a nullable string. So let's actually make a function for that. So we'll just use string, and we'll call it name validator, and it's going to take a string, technically it could be null, and pass it in. And in here, what we can do is if value equals null, or value, in this case, is empty, that's the kind of stuff we're checking, we'd return a string, right? We return saying, name is required in this case. Now you could do more logic here, like maybe it can only be 10 characters and you can just kind of go through and check a bunch of things. But at the very end, if everything's good, we just return null and we are great. So what I can do now in my game form is actually just pass forward provider.nameValidator. And what's cool is I can just actually pass a reference to the function because it's following the exact same contract. So alternatively, I could do it this way. I could do val and then call this and pass in val. That's the same thing. However, that's quite a bit more lines, and this is just a lot cleaner, right? And that only works because we purposely made this match what it was expecting. So I'll save that. And what we'll see now is, let's just do one quick thing here. So in order to actually validate it, we have to go if form key dot current context. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to put that there. Is it current context, or I think it's current state? Yeah, current state dot validate. So what we do is we actually call the validation function, and if it doesn't work, this is where we need an exclamation mark because this could technically be null, but we know it's not because we've instantiated it. Everything is good. So if it doesn't validate, we just want to return out of here for now. And let's just see how that actually works. So if I remove this, for instance, and click save, you actually see name is required. But if I have something, everything's good. So let's do this for the other ones too. So we're going to have the console validator as well. And similarly, we just would change this to here. Obviously, there's a way you could make this even more reusable, and I do that on other projects too, but I'm trying to keep this relatively simple. Validator, provider dot console validator, and just get rid of that. And we'll do something similar to here. Let's just go release year validator, which doesn't exist yet, but let's make it. So, and I don't feel like typing that out again, so we're going back here and we're copying and we're pasting, and we'll just call this release year is required. Now for release year, there's a couple other things maybe we want to check. So first of all, we want to make sure that it is an int, like it's a number, right? So what we can do, I'm just gonna make something called int value. There's definitely other ways to do this, but this is pretty straightforward. And we'll actually do a try parse on it, and we'll pass in value. And now what we can do is we can go if int value is null, we can return invalid year, right? So we're doing two checks. First, we're checking to make sure it's not empty, and then we're making sure it's a valid number. Now, we can also check something else. For instance, the first video game ever made was in 1958. So we can just make sure that int value is less than 1950, or if it is less than 1958, we know that's an invalid year. And that's just for this use case and a fun little trivia fact I wanted to include in here. But you can do all kinds of validation. So we have really serial validation. Cool. So let's actually get to creating this now. So essentially, so right now this submit function is returning void, but I want to kind of let the UI know, hey, you know, if this worked or not. So what we can do is we're actually going to return an either here. So it's going to either return a string, and this is going to be a nullable string for one particular reason. And in the case that the form isn't valid, I don't want to return like, you know, a message being like error or anything, because we already kind of have that built into the way this works, right? We already get back this lovely like name is required sort of thing. So I'm just going to kind of do like a quiet return. We're returning left is an error, but we're not actually going to pass a message. So that way, if we wanted to, you know, in the UI show something and it was null, we could just not show anything versus like a different type of error. So we're going to start with that. Then what we want to do now is actually call our API. So we will await our game service, and we're going to call that save function. And if you remember this one, this is kind of a cool function, because what it's going to do is it's going to check if the game ID is empty. We're going to call the create function. If it's not, we're going to call the update function. So this is like a, you know, a shorthand for us to either create or update. So that's cool. And we need to pass in the game. And right now the game is actually our state itself. We're literally passing in this right here. So we get that back. Now remember, this isn't returning a game necessarily, it's returning an either because of our functional programming. And we're going to go result.fold. Fold. I want to get those that autocomplete. And in the case that it's an error, this is where we will return left and actually pass in the error itself, because this is a string. So we're sending back like this string now that our UI can decide to, you know, show an alert or a toast or something. But in the case that it worked, we now have the game, and right here we will return right of the game, so that our UI, maybe it wants to do something like, you know, show a message that says, you know, game saved and have the name of the game. So we'll give it back to the, you know, the UI to do what it wants. Now I can get rid of this. Now there's a couple other things I want to do here. Whenever it actually successfully works, I want to call our clear function, right? Because I want the form to be empty for the next time that someone comes to it. And here's two other cool things we can do. So we haven't seen this yet, but we can do ref. Instead of watch or read, we also have something called invalidate. And this will allow us to what's called invalidate a provider. So what we want to actually invalidate is the game list provider, right? Because the game list provider, we kind of want to be like, hey, we need you to refresh because something's changed. We know something has likely changed. And the cool thing about invalidate, it doesn't call the refresh right away. It's basically marking it as stale, meaning when it's accessed again, when you come back to that screen, that's when it will make the call. So it's kind of like a safe, quiet way to be like, hey, we need this data again. It's no longer necessarily up to date. We want to invalidate it. Similarly, we also want to invalidate the game detail provider, because if you were editing something, you want to actually see the update. So what we need to do is actually pass in game.id, and that is all good. So now we have that stuff validating, everything's great, and let's see if stuff works. So I'm going to make a game. We're going to do Star Tropics. It was for the NES, and I'm just going to guess the year. I'm going to say like 1991. And let's just click save. And we see some stuff kind of worked. There's a little bit of an error here, and I think I know what's going on there. But something happened, and let's just see here. We should see now, yeah, there it is there. Now there's a problem because the image is coming back as blank, which we will solve right now. So why is that happening? Let's go to our game model. So photo I did not actually set as an include to JSON false. I should have done that because we're not dealing with media management here. So let's just go like that. So what was happening is when that data actually got created, and we can look at it in Postman, it was setting it to a blank because we haven't modified it, and then Flutter was complaining because it can't find an image that has no name. So what I need to do, actually, I'm just going to do this through Postman just to show you what it looks like, the data itself. So we'll see our game has a photo of blank, and that's why we're having the error. So I'm actually going to take this, and it's ID number 7, and let me just delete. So I can go to my delete endpoint that I've set up already and hit 7 here and click send. Now if we list games again, we shouldn't see that one in there. It's no longer in there. Awesome. Now let us rebuild this because we don't have a refresh button in our app. And everything's cool there. Let's just try that again. So Star Tropics NES and 1991, sure. And let's just click save. Oh, interesting. Oh, you know why? So when you're using generated code, you have to remember to rerun your generator. So let's just run that again. It's the Dart run build runner build. And in the meantime, I'm going to get this process underway by, that was ID 6. So let's delete. Oh no, that's probably, I have to list it again. It's 7 again. Recycling IDs. This mock server is terrible. Just kidding. Okay, so it should be gone now. Okay, cool. And we'll just wait for this to finish. Okay. Tropics. Round 3, here we go. NES 1991. And we'll save. Let me just actually open up my debug console, see if that error comes. This time it didn't, which is great. Let's click the X, and we see it in there. So that's pretty cool. Now, something we definitely want to do in our game form is, so we have the submit function. Let's actually make this async. And what we can do is maybe do game equals await provider.submit. And over here, what we can do is we can fold on that result. And we actually can call it result. It's not really a game yet until we fold it. So result.fold error. So in the case it's an error, we will, this is where we would show a toast message or something, but I'm not going to worry about that here. And here, this means we got a game back successfully. So we want to call something else. And what do we want to do? Well, let's do navigator.outContext.pop. And you'd probably also want to show a toast message here being like game saved successfully. And because you have access to the game, we can make that message really have the game name in it or whatever. So now if I add a new one, we'll just do Roller Coaster Tycoon, PC. Again, guessing, must have been like year 2000 or something. So we have that there, and the screen went away, and everything is great. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is the ability to actually edit one of these. So let's just try that. Let me just add that in there. It's bothering me. And in order to edit, we're going to go to our game detail screen, which I'm having trouble finding. There it is. And in our app bar, when we actually have a game, let's actually put the actions in. Let's put an action for an edit button. So first I want to check to make sure if game does not equal null, then we will have a text button, and on pressed we'll do something, but its child will be just something that says like edit. So now we should have, if I go to any of these, I should see an edit button here, right? Now, what is this edit button going to do? Well, we need to do similar to what the on the game list screen. We want to kind of call this same function, right? We want to load the do a navigator, load the game form screen. And if I simply do that, it will almost work. I click this, I get to the screen, but it's empty. So what we have to do before we go here is actually when we click, we want to do ref.read and get our game form provider.notifier and load in this game. So we already have access to the game right here, so we're good. So now if I go here, we'll actually see and click edit, you'll see that stuff's in there. Go back, let's pick the RCT one and edit it. And that's great, everything's there. Now I just want to show you why some of this invalidation stuff is important. So let's go back to our form provider. I'm just going to remove these right here, or comment them out rather. And so let's just, we're at RCT, let's go to edit it and let's call it like RCT2, you know, and I click save, invalid year. I guess there's something wrong with that. I'm going to have to, we'll look into that in a minute. 1999, let's say. So you'll see, cool, RCT, PC, release, but it didn't actually update. And if I go back to the list view, you know, it didn't update here. If I rebuild the app though, we will see, you know, it did actually update because it made that network call again. So having these in here during the success will actually allow us to go here and, you know, 2000, RCT3, click save, and we actually see it updates here because we invalidated it, and because it's still, the screen is still visible, it's like, hey, I need, you know, I need that data again, so I went and called it and got it in its most, you know, up-to-date form. And similarly with the list, we have it saying that too because we also invalidated the list. So that's what I want to do there. Now, two more things. One, there's obviously something going wrong with when we're saving the dates. You'll see it goes to like 70. So I think there's just an issue with probably our model. So let's just look at our game.dart and release year. Let's look back at our mock API here, because maybe I just mistyped something. Release year, release, it looks like it's right. Yeah, that's right. Int release year. Oh, so the reason is I put include to JSON false. I think that's why when we had that photo error, I meant to put it on this one, but I put it on this one. So what was happening is it wasn't actually setting it, and our fake API will, if the value is missing, it will automatically just generate a random one. So that's definitely what was happening. Now I need to run this again. We'll test it in a minute. This will take, you know, 30 seconds. The last thing I want to do is let's have a delete button. So in our game details screen, similarly, we can do this if game is null and have a delete button. Let's do it that way. However, I don't really want to write if game is null twice. So a nice little fun fact you can do is we can actually go and wrap this in a list like this, and take another text button, and we're going to get rid of what it actually does, but let's just do that there, and make this say delete. Now we probably want to, definitely for this, you'd want some kind of confirmation modal, you know, being like, are you sure you want to? But that's not really necessary for this tutorial. But you definitely want to, you know, probably do that to, you know, stop people from misclicking it. But now we have this delete button. So let's make that work. So what I'm going to do is we're going to put the delete function within the list provider because it's kind of relevant to this. And what we can do is this will just return, let's just do a void, and we'll call it delete. And we'll pass in a game async. And here what we'd want to do is run, we'd await our game service. We already have this function made, right? We have a delete function. Sorry, it's not delete, we called it remove. And we want to pass in the game.id. So we want to do that. Now what does this return? Let's find that out. So result, this is going to be an either. So what we can do is we can go result.fold, and if there's an error, we're just going to, in this case, just print the error. This again is something, you know, we could return out of this, you know, the response and all that kind of stuff. So let's just print E right there, and this is actually a bool, right? So in the case of success, what do we want to do? Well, we're going to want to return right, and I realize we do actually, so let's actually do this properly. So we're going to either return a string or a bool from this either, and here we'll actually just return left of the error, but we'll return right with success because that's either going to be true or false, and we need to remember to return this whole thing. So now we have this delete function on our list provider. So on our detail screen, again, pending, putting in some kind of confirmation for our user, when we want to actually do this, we can go ref.read game list provider .notifier.delete. And here we need to pass in the game itself. So let's go async, and we're going to await this. Let's call it result. And of course, result is either a string or a bool. So we can go result.fold error. We just, let's just print the error. And this is where we would probably want to show a toast with that error message again. And otherwise, we're getting back, something called success. And here, if success is true, we want to essentially take our navigator of context.pop because we want to get out of there. If you deleted something, it shouldn't be there anymore. So let's test that out. And this, maybe we want to show an error, if it wasn't a success, show a generic error message. But let's just try clicking on, I don't want to delete that one. Let's delete the first one here. So let's just click delete. And it did go away, but it's still here, right? And if I reload, we'll see that it's gone. There it is, name 44 is gone. Because similarly, in our game list provider, we actually, when there is a success, let us also invalidate the list provider. Now, we don't have access to ref here, of course. So let's get access to ref real quick. So we can just do this dot ref. And pass in ref. So before we actually return, we can go ref.invalidate self. I think this will work. Hey, the image has changed. That's so fun. Okay, so let's do name 3. Let's click delete. And I think we get an error because I think we're trying to nulls and accept. Oh, right. Hang on, we have to do a green arrow rebuild because we actually changed the way this works. So let's go to name 2, click delete, and cool, we invalidated it. So now when we come back, it's actually gone. We probably also want to invalidate the detail view too, just because maybe that ID got recycled and it would in this, but I'm not going to worry about that for the context of this tutorial. So there you have it. It's cool that we got some new images on the API. They, for some reason, just started changing on me, and I like this one. But yeah, that's what I wanted to cover in this series. I think there's a ton of really useful stuff in here, and if you're making a pretty standard app, unless you're making maybe like a game or something, like you're going to be doing this kind of thing all the time, managing state, managing CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete. And I think this approach is really nice. I'm using it on many projects, and it keeps your business logic really separated from your UI. So thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe, and throw something in the comments if you have any questions. Bye for now.